And as we begin this month of May, this Sunday and next, we're going to do a little mini-series that I'm calling Finding Your Roots. Finding Our Roots. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the show on PBS called Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr. It's one of my favorites. And he often shares, as he is exploring the history of people's past with them, that there is a lot to be gained by looking back. As he's experienced in doing this with people on his show, discovering our roots deepens our sense of identity. It fosters a reconnection with who we are, with where we've come from, and it can also enhance our sense of resilience when we realize what those who have come before us had to move through, overcome, and endure in the times where they were burgeoning this new line, this new tree of our family roots. So I wanted to take a look at what we call New Thought, and that's the umbrella on which we as Unity fall under. And you'll often hear that word, but a lot of people don't exactly know what that means. So New Thought traces its roots back to the mid-19th century. So we're not that old in terms of the history of time. And at the time that this new way of thinking and understanding and looking at God and ourselves and the universe and how it all works together, we were right in the midst of our own revolution here in this country. It had just been a few decades since we had declared our independence. And part of that core principle, as that independence was declared, was the freedom to explore, the freedom to question, the freedom to look at lots of different ideas and see what resonated with the people. Up until then, the church primarily dictated, this is what the truth is, and you were to simply believe it and embrace it and not question it. It was also the height of the scientific revolution. This was upending many of the doctrines that the church had taught, specifically around how long we've been here on this planet, how old the planet was. There was the introduction of Darwinism that was published right around the same time, helping us to understand in this long history how we've evolved rather than just created and showed up here on the earth. It was the Industrial Revolution. And if you'll remember a few months back in our spiral dynamics perspective of things, we're smack in the orange, which is really about the individual. It's about the individual's right to question, the individual's right to dream, the individual's right to determine their own destiny by their hard work and by their ability to think outside the box. And it was really a lot about improving people's lives. People felt like they now had some power where they could bring greater comfort, bring greater through the medical world, greater healing into the human experience. One of those concentrated groups that were meeting and discussing this was a group of writers in Concord, Massachusetts. They all happened to find themselves there at the same time in about the 1840s. And this kind of became a hub for New Thought, at least in that part of the world. It was people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Louisa May Alcott, many great literaries now in our American history. And they met frequently, usually several times a week, to discuss God, humanity, the universe, science, philosophy. This was a big think tank where they shared ideas. And out of that group was birthed the Transcendental Movement. And that was brought into being by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it wasn't some new idea, it was really a blending of many ancient ideas. In fact, New Thought itself isn't really new at all. It's just a new way of understanding some of these ancient ideas. Ralph Waldo Emerson had studied luminaries like Plato, and then Native American and their spiritual beliefs, and Eastern religion. So it was a broad exploration of what many had held to be true in a way that he saw could now be implanted, could be formed, could be at least an option for the people here in the United States. And here's his core tenets. I want you to listen to these because they might sound a little bit familiar. The first core tenet of the Transcendental movement is that there is unity in all creation. So there is not a God separate from man, separate from animals, that there is a oneness that is woven through all of creation. The second tenet is there is an innate goodness in all of humanity. This was very different from the church doctrine that had said that all of humanity was born sinful. And this was a new thought to say, no, we believe that there is good in all of humanity. It may not always get expressed, may not get expressed very often, but there is that innate goodness of the Creator that exists. And the third tenet, main tenet of this, is that the path to the awareness, to the experience, to the connection came through revelation and insight, not from logic. This was the height of reason and logic being the driver behind many people's understanding of life. And this movement was saying, no, you have to go beyond reason and logic to really be able to tap into this truth running through all of life. It does, at least for me, sound very familiar, and it sounds very similar to the first, second, and fourth principles that we hold within unity. The first principle, there's one presence and one power, and that's God. And that runs through all of God's creation. Our second is that the divinity is within all humankind, so that this innate goodness is there, at least in potential. And then we also hold as one of our core principles that we have direct access through God. We no longer need a priest or an intermediary to pray on our behalf. We can go, as Charles Strom would like to say, direct to headquarters and have that experience ourselves through prayer and meditation. So we think prayer is that direct link to God. It's that creative thinking that we have that takes us into a different realm that allows us to have this connection of mind, and is the place where we can tap into greater wisdom, greater love, greater prosperity, and everything that we would call good. So out of this soup, I like to call it a free exploration, the New Thought movement was born. Most people would trace it back to a man named Phineas Quimby, who lived in the early 1800s. And he stumbled upon this idea that disease was caused by the mind. And he used his skills and experimented working with people to heal them through the mind. He was a mesmerist, he was an intuitive, and he believed that by changing our thoughts, we could change the experience both of health and sickness. That was the uncausal, or that the unconscious belief was the core root of all sickness. He wrote this, he said, "The trouble is in the mind, for the body is only the house that the mind dwells in. Therefore, if your mind has been deceived by some invisible enemy," which he was calling those unconscious beliefs that we have, into a belief that you have put it into form as a disease, with or without your knowledge. By theory or truth, I come into contact with your enemy and restore you to health and happiness. This I do part mentally and part by talking, or we would call affirming, until I correct the wrong belief and establish the truth. and the truth is the cure. So that was his understanding some 300 years ago. And he went around the country and offered his services to people who were having health challenges. We can see from this idea that Phineas Quimby grasped onto that it mirrors in some ways principles 3 and 5 that we hold here in Unity. Number 3 is that human beings create their experiences by the activity of their thinking and feeling. And everything in the manifest realm, everything that is seen as solid, had its beginning in thought. So that if we can just get to the thoughts, then we can create something different. And then our 5th principle is that we have to put this into practice. Simply knowing it or understanding it is not enough. We are called to live it. We are called to find ways in which we can get into alignment with it in our everyday lives. One of the patients of Phineas Quimby, who was cured with him through crippling injuries that she experienced from an accident, was Mary Baker Eddy, and she is the mother of what we now here today call Christian Science. Both Mr. Quimby and Mary Baker Eddy came to see and understand that this healing method that they had began to practice was really an updated understanding of the way that Jesus was able to heal when he walked the earth. That he was able to tap in to those persons' unconscious beliefs and heal them, and as a result, they also healed physically. This became the foundation for what later became known as the Church of Christ Scientists that still exists today. And it started in about 1870 by Mary Baker Eddy. And she in turn taught many students. She had hundreds of students that she was helping to begin to understand and implement this practice, to go out and offer this same kind of healing to other people. And the most influential of all of those students on the New Thought movement was a woman by the name of Emma Curtis Hopkins. And while Mary Baker Eddy believed that her healing method was all that one needed to study and to practice, she was very clear and discouraged all of her students from exploring anything else other than the specific ways in which she had written and described and taught this. Emma Curtis Hopkins believed that the students or anybody coming should be free to discover and to add and to expand their own understanding of that. So as she broke away from Mary Baker Eddy, she founded her own school. It was called the Emma Hopkins College of Christian Science. So she still liked that name, even though she had kind of distanced herself from the Church Christ Scientist. And as they started this school, they were able to allow people to study and work with this, but also what they would instruct them to do is to make these ideas your own. In other words, here's information, here's the truth as we understand it, but you're encouraged to go and explore and discover the truth as it shows up for you. And to teach these principles, to live these principles and learn from the practice of living them. She also created an organization called the International New Thought Alliance, which continues today. It's now 107 years old, to support people, to support different groups. And they would have annual conferences and speakers and printed materials to, as quickly as possible, bring in as many people as possible to this new understanding. Out of that, Emma Curtis Hopkins College came the three major founders of what we commonly call New Thought today. And that is divine science, religious science, now known as Centers for Spiritual Living, just because they wanted to confuse you even more, and then unity. And the first was divine science. Melinda Kramer founded divine science in 1886, and it grew to a membership of about $10,000 people. Maybe they had $10,000, I don't know, that would have been a lot of money. And probably the most notable minister that came out of divine science was a writer and speaker called Emmett Fox. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Emmett Fox, but yes, Emmett Fox was my first introduction to New Thought, and I didn't even know there was such a thing called New Thought. I had no idea that there was such a thing called divine science or religious science or unity or any other people who kind of thought in a weird way like me. But I happened upon, in some synchronistic way, to discover this book on a shelf in a used bookstore, and it called to me and I picked it up. It was called Power Through Constructive Thinking. And it was my first time ever, having grown up in the Presbyterian church with my father, a Presbyterian minister, heard anything out of the Bible that made sense to me, except for maybe a few of Jesus's specific, instructions to people. The rest of it I had just never been able to connect with. He had a chapter on the Lord's Prayer that after I read it, I said, that makes perfect sense to me now. It would be 10 years later before I would discover unity, but it was the launching for me in understanding and being able to explore my Christian roots in a new way, in a way that really supported and served me. Today, there are less than a couple of dozen divine science churches in the United States, but they still maintain a very robust digital presence. So if you wanted to go out and Google them, in fact, in Roanoke, Virginia was one of the few divine science churches that were still in existence in the United States. The other major group that grew out of those who were studying under Ernest Hopkins was religious science. And Ernest Holmes was the founder of that group of thought. He was initially ordained through divine science, so he came out of the same roots of that and established religious science and began to focus on certain areas that were different from divine science. And Ernest Holmes really focused in on prayer as its core function, as the core way that they were serving the people who came to them, and they called it a spiritual mind treatment. So it was sort of going back to Phineas Quimby, that if we could help people shift their thoughts and core beliefs, then they could experience not only healing of body, but of mind and of soul. Today, there's about 400 Centers for Spiritual Living throughout the United States. We have one in Dallas. And it's interesting that the spiritual mind treatment that is the very core and center of that most of their classes, and when you're seeking to really learn and discover more, this is where they start you, looks very similar to our 5-step prayer process here in Unity. In fact, when you look at these 3 different branches, we have far more in common than we have differences. So those 5 steps are recognition, unification, realization, thanksgiving, and release. And we're going to practice those in just a few minutes. In fact, this belief of the power of prayer to change our minds and hearts is not just central in religious science or even in divine science. It's certainly been central in Unity. It's one of the things that we all share as our core foundational practices. And so this morning, I just would like to invite you to perhaps experience a little bit of that as we move into our meditation time. We're going to go through these 5 steps. I'll guide you through. And I would ask you, as we're getting prepared for this, if you want to set aside anything and kind of get yourself comfortable, is to bring to your mind and heart something that you would like to see shifted through this power of prayer, whether it's something physically, whether it's a relationship, whether it is a new job you're seeking, whatever it is, just bring that to your mind and heart. And as we begin to allow that power of prayer to move in and through us, you might want to close your eyes so that you can focus all of that energy internally. Become aware of your breath, because it is the very breath of God flowing in and out of you. In fact, that's the very first step when we move into this time of prayer, is that we recognize that God is all there is. So we start by just affirming that in our own minds and hearts, bringing that as a strong belief and truth to the core of our being. God is all there is. There is one perfect intelligence that is on purpose, and it creates everything out of itself, including me. The God of the universe is unlimited. And then we shift to the unification part, where we connect in an intimate way our mind and heart with God, mind and heart. The Father and I are one. I have been born from the very divine energy of God itself, and it is alive in me, connecting me to God. The mind and heart of God are working through me, as me, right now. And when we feel that sense of connection, we move to declaring that as our own realization. We affirm that this is true. We affirm that we can, with this God's loving energy, change our own beliefs and thoughts, and change our lives as a result. I think and allow only loving thoughts to pass through my consciousness. I let go of any negative thoughts, knowing that they are simply an illusion. They are temporary. I focus on the highest and best ideas, and I allow new ideas and wisdom to flow through me. And when we feel that sense of oneness, there is an energy of gratitude, of thanksgiving that overflows our inner being. We accept that because of this moment where we have connected and opened the channels, that it has already become a reality in our life, even if there's no outward expression of it yet. I'm grateful for this creative power for these divine principles that are at work in my life, and for the knowledge that continues to be revealed to me. And then finally we move to release. We let go and let God. We allow God to move through us to create the perfect result. We release our attachment to what that looks like. We let Spirit handle the details, with our only job to be to get out of the way. And we declare, and so it is. And so I allow it to be. Amen. And so as you're comfortable, I just invite you to bring your awareness back to this time and space. Feeling and being aware of your body, and when you're ready to open your eyes. You know, that each of our sister organizations share these same core principles that we hold here at Unity. And as I said earlier, what we want to remember is that we have a lot more in common than there is differences. We see each other and support each other and know that there might be slightly different paths that speak to different people, but we are all moving in the same direction. I love this little clip that I found out there, and it's by a CSL minister in Colorado who does this little podcast about Ask a Question. And so this one asks us, what is new thought? Let's see if we can play that.
Hi, welcome to Contemplate This, where we're discussing spiritual questions. Welcome, glad to see you here. Today I want to address a question that we get often about what is new thought. We're a part of New Thought, and you hear new thought being bantered about in our world. And so new thought is the phrase that is used to describe an umbrella. I call it an umbrella that hangs over a number of spiritual traditions that exist in the world today. One of the things that William James told us is that New Thought is the unique contribution that the United States of America has made to the formation of religion in our world. And so New Thought is the umbrella phrase for unity, the wonderful teaching called Unity, for our teaching, which is called Science of Mind and Spirit, for divine science, and even some feel that Christian Science kind of can fit under the phrase of New Thought. But it's all about New Thought, ancient traditions. That's something that one of my colleagues, Dr. Michael Beckwith, talks about. Because what we teach isn't really new, it's ancient, and the concepts are woven through many traditions from many different parts of our world. It's just that New Thought is an invitation to have a new idea, to consider a new idea about the way the universe works, about our own individual cosmology. And we teach people how to think new thoughts, because it's so easy to get caught up in our stories and in our traditions and in what people told us was true about everything from how we live our lives to religion and the nature of the universe. And so New Thought is a great phrase because it invites us to have a new thought. And New Thought is spiritual study, spiritual practice, spiritual contemplation, spiritual awareness that invites us into a deeper, new idea, new thought about ourselves and our world. And so we sometimes are afraid of our new thoughts, but our new thoughts are good. I know my new thoughts lead me into really amazing experiences. So I hope as you're contemplating this concept for yourself that you'll consider, having a new thought today, having the courage to have a new thought about yourself and about the world. Thanks for joining us, and we hope that you will be with us again in the future. We're going to have other episodes, and if you have spiritual questions that you would like to address, please feel free to put them in the comments section below, and I'll be happy to address them. Thanks.
I like that idea of have a new thought. You know, this is the breath and the openness that Unity invites people into. We'll share with you what others and, different teachers and ministers have taught, and yet you're also invited to have your own new thoughts. So next week, we're going to look at Finding Our Roots Part 2. We're going to go a little bit more into the history of unity, and I really am going to be focusing on shining a light on the women that have made such a huge impact. You notice many of those have women as their core leaders, at least at the beginning. So as we celebrate Mother's Day, as we celebrate women, we want to also celebrate the women who have been a part of our movement. I wanted to end today by sharing a simple way to remember our 5 principles, because any practice that we can do that allows us on a regular basis to embody these principles as we're coming up against challenges in our lives. And this is how we teach the kids. So it's easy to do. So I'm going to do it once and then I'm going to invite you to do it with me, okay? Because it's pretty simple. It says, God within thinks, prays, and walks with these principles. All right? Try it with me. God within thinks, prays, and walks the walk. Namaste. Oh, and one more thing here. Spirits in Rebellion. For those of you who really like to get into history, and I'm one of those people, this is a great book if you want to explore further about the history of New Thought. Well, it is our opportunity now to share of our financial good with Center of Unity. This is the first Sunday in May, and so we are going to be refocusing on the first Sunday to remind you of our building fund. We have obviously had some expenses as part of this. We have also discovered that one of our air conditioners is on its last leg in Fellowship Hall. We're going to keep running it until it just won't run no more. But those are not cheap things to replace. We're looking at about $10,000. And this will be 5 of 10 units. We're so grateful. These units have been here since the building was built in 23 years ago. So this is only going to be the 5th one we've had to replace, but we just need to have that awareness. Like in any house, there are ongoing expenses. So, if you find that you can give a little bit more specifically to our building fund, those funds are reserved only for use for improving or maintaining our physical space. We would be very grateful. We just ask you to keep that in mind. So in just a moment here, we're going to invite you to come up. We're going to do our walk of prosperity, if you will, and I just ask you to hold that as you're moving through, as the ushers invite you to come up. Even if this isn't your Sunday to share or you give through our committed giving program, you can come and just add your energy to the basket. Again, we're doing this in spirit, so the more we can hold those same thoughts of abundance, not only for our own lives, but for Center of Unity, the greater we create that. So just hold that energy as you're walking through this, and then